Hello, my name is Daniel. Thank you for being here with me today. If you enjoy real, heartbreaking cheating stories from Reddit, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me. This is one of those stories that stays with you, not because of how dramatic it is, but because of how quietly cruel real-life moments can be. It's about love that turned into pain, and how even after betrayal, some people expect your heart to keep showing up for them. Our story begins in a quiet corner of Asheville, North Carolina. A woman named Rachel, 27, had just ended a 4-year relationship with her ex, Marcus, 31. It happened on New Year's Day. Not because they'd grown apart, not because they couldn't make it work, but because she caught him cheating. And once the truth was out, Rachel didn't hesitate. She walked away. But Marcus didn't. Since the breakup, Rachel said he wouldn't leave her alone. He was calling constantly, messaging her on every platform you can think of. Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. He drove past her apartment, left notes on her windshield. She told him clearly more than once that it was over and that he needed to stop. But he didn't care. Then, one Wednesday morning, just after 2 a.m., her phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was Marcus again, over and over, until she finally picked up. His voice was weak. He said he was in a lot of pain, nauseous, sweating, couldn't breathe right. He told her he thought something was really wrong and he needed to get to the hospital. Rachel told him to call an ambulance. But Marcus said he couldn't afford the bill. He said he didn't have the money for it and didn't want to go bankrupt just for getting checked out. Rachel listened, silent, confused. She didn't know if he was being honest or trying to pull something. After everything he'd done, her trust in him was gone. He asked her to drive him, said he was in too much pain to get there himself. She paused. Her chest ached, not from love, not from guilt, but from how familiar this moment felt. The same helplessness she'd felt when she found out he'd been with someone else while kissing her goodnight just weeks earlier. The same panic when she tried to understand how someone who claimed to love her could lie so easily. She told him no. She told him to call his brother. And then she hung up. The next day, she found out he had gone to the ER somehow. He was diagnosed with pancreatitis. Now, he's making her feel like the villain, telling her it was heartless not to help him, guilt-tripping her into thinking she should come visit him at the hospital to make things right. Rachel doesn't know what to feel. Part of her aches with sadness. She never wanted anyone to suffer. But another part, the bigger part, remembers that this man shattered her, that he didn't think twice about sneaking around behind her back while she planned their future. And now, even in pain, he's still finding a way to control her, still reaching through every crack she left open, still expecting her to be there like nothing happened. She asked the internet one question. Was she the bad person for not driving him? Most people said no. One person replied, "He sounds manipulative and emotionally abusive. You owe him nothing." Another wrote, "Block his number. If he needs a ride, maybe he should call the woman he cheated with." And someone else added, "This wasn't a friendly breakup. It was betrayal. He has no right to demand anything from you." Rachel is still processing everything. And I don't think this story has a perfect answer. What I do know is that healing takes boundaries, and sometimes the cruelest thing someone can do isn't what they say, it's how they expect you to keep giving, even after they've broken everything. Let me know in the comments below what you would have done in Rachel's shoes. And stay with me. There's more to come. When Rachel found out she was pregnant, she was 7 weeks along and terrified. It was early spring in Asheville, North Carolina, and the city was just beginning to thaw from a long winter. But nothing in Rachel's life felt like it was blooming. She was still reeling from the fallout from her breakup with Marcus, barely able to sleep, and now she was carrying the weight of a child, alone. She went to her family doctor for routine blood work and urine tests, hoping to ease the growing anxiety that had been pressing down on her chest. Her regular physician was out on leave, so she ended up seeing someone new, a substitute doctor, who didn't even bother to learn her name. The woman barely made eye contact as she reviewed her chart. Her voice was clipped when she said, "You have a urinary tract infection. If we don't treat it right now, you will have a miscarriage." She froze. Her heart skipped. No one had prepared her for that sentence. She didn't know at the time that what the doctor said wasn't even true, but fear overrode logic. All she could think about was the tiny life she might lose. The doctor told her she'd phone the prescription to Rachel's usual pharmacy. "Pick it up tomorrow morning," she said, and just like that, she left the room. The next morning, Rachel drove to the pharmacy, exhausted and nauseous, but determined. She waited at the counter, hands on her stomach, trying not to imagine the worst. But when the pharmacist checked the system, he shook his head. He said, "There's nothing here for you." Confused, she called the doctor's office. The receptionist sounded flustered. She said, "That doctor quit this morning. She didn't call in your prescription, and she didn't sign the paper copy either." Rachel's voice cracked as she asked what she was supposed to do now. There was a pause on the line, and then, "Sorry, there's nothing we can do," followed by a click. They hung up on her. Alone in her car, she sat in the parking lot, shaking. She hadn't cried yet, not when Marcus begged her to come see him at the hospital, not when the loneliness of pregnancy began to take its toll. But now, over something as simple as an unsigned prescription, the tears came fast and hot. The next day, Rachel applied for a new doctor at a different clinic. She knew she deserved better. And she posted a Google review, just a paragraph, honest and calm, describing the negligence she experienced. It wasn't vindictive, it was the truth. But it didn't take long before the same clinic called her. A stern voice on the other end of the line demanded she remove the review. "One bad day," they said, "doesn't give you the right to slander our entire practice." Rachel hung up without saying a word. She sat quietly at her kitchen table, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the slow ticking of the clock above the stove. All she had wanted was to be heard, to not feel invisible, to know that someone, somewhere, would take her pain seriously. Instead, she was being asked to silence herself, to make the world more comfortable, at the cost of her own truth. Online, people responded with support. One commenter said, "It's not slander if it's the truth." Another added, "Honestly, I'd update the review to mention that they called you and tried to intimidate you into deleting it." Another voice chimed in, "You paid for that appointment. They ran those tests, and then they left you with nothing. You did everything right, and they still failed you." Rachel didn't post another update. She didn't argue with the clinic or call them back. She didn't need to. Because sometimes the most heartbreaking part of these stories isn't the betrayal or the mistake. It's the silence that follows, the way people in power expect you to simply accept it, to move on, to pretend it didn't happen. But Rachel knew the truth, and the truth mattered. It always does. Rachel had been holding it together for weeks, barely. Between navigating pregnancy on her own and working long shifts to keep up with rent, her world had become a delicate balancing act of exhaustion, guilt, and quiet sadness. But when she came home one gray Thursday evening and saw the beanie rabbit, her composure finally broke. It was one of the few things that still gave her comfort. a soft, faded rabbit plush she'd kept since she was 19, passed down from her late aunt in Chapel Hill who used to collect limited edition toys. Rachel had moved it into her office in Asheville, away from the noise and chaos, hoping to protect the memory. But now that comfort was ruined. When she walked into the room, her nearly 4-year-old son, Henry, sat in the nursery clutching the soaked remains of the rabbit. It was stained in dark blue streaks of marker. Pools of ink had bled into the fabric. And Rachel froze. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just knelt beside him and took the toy from his hands, quietly. Earlier that day, she'd let him play in his room while she folded laundry. The baby gate had been left open by accident. In those 15 minutes, he had wandered into her office, climbed onto the chair, and chosen the one thing he wasn't supposed to touch. Rachel's partner, David, 35, had tried to fix it. He put the rabbit in the washing machine before she got home, hoping to clean the ink off. But the result was even worse. The dyes separated and spread across the fur like bruises. Rachel couldn't even look at him, at either of them. She didn't yell, but the pain in her eyes said enough. "Why did you leave him alone?" she asked David, her voice shaking. 15 minutes, that's all it was, he said. She asked him to discipline Henry, to give him a time out, take away his tablet, anything. But David said it wasn't fair. He didn't mean to, he told her. He just wanted to color. But Rachel didn't see it that way. To her, it felt like one more piece of her life slipping through her fingers, one more thing she couldn't keep safe. Online, people had opinions. One commenter said, "If he's old enough to understand how to use a tablet, then he's old enough to know he shouldn't touch things that don't belong to him." Another added, "A short time out with a conversation would have been appropriate. It's not about punishing him, it's about teaching him to respect other people's things." Some even said Rachel wasn't wrong to be upset, but that David was wrong to ignore it. "You were responsible for him," one person wrote. "If the roles were reversed and your Star Wars figures were ruined, would you still say it didn't matter?" Rachel didn't reply to any of the comments. She just sat in silence that night, watching her son sleep, the stuffed rabbit now hidden deep in the trash can outside. She wasn't angry at Henry. He was just a child, but she grieved the loss of something that meant more than her partner seemed to understand. And deep down, she resented how alone she felt in her own sadness. It wasn't about the toy, not really. It was about what it represented. Her past, her family, the small comforts that had carried her through the hardest moments. And now those moments were starting to add up. She wondered if her son would ever understand how something so small could hurt this much. And she wondered if David ever would. David stood in the kitchen, rinsing his coffee mug for the 3rd time, just to have something to do with his hands. The silence in the house was heavy, thick like fog. Rachel hadn't said much since he came home that day. She'd curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled over her legs and barely looked at him when he walked through the door. He could tell the moment he saw her eyes. Hurt didn't even begin to cover it. The appointment had been on the calendar for months. Rachel, 34, had a heart rhythm disorder that had been manageable for years with medication and rest. But after a few terrifying ER visits, she finally decided to see a specialist in Charlotte. Getting in hadn't been easy. She made the appointment in October. The earliest available slot was in February. David had promised to drive her. It was a 2-hour trip from Asheville, and they both agreed it wasn't safe for her to drive that distance alone. Her condition could strike at any moment. Dizziness, blurred vision, the kind of unpredictable heartbeat that made her grip the counter until it passed. He told her he'd take the whole day off work. But when February came, deadlines loomed. David went into the shop that morning planning to slip away by noon. He watched the clock tick closer to 1, then 1:30, then 2. Customers kept trickling in. A small job ran longer than it should have. He didn't answer her texts, didn't pick up her calls. He couldn't. By the time he got home, it was nearly 4. Rachel sat there, silent. Then she finally asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" David had no good answer. He stammered something about being busy, about the day getting away from him, about how hard it was to step away. She looked at him, not with anger, but with devastation. "You could have just told me," she said. "I could have tried to find someone else. I waited, David. I kept hoping you'd walk through the door." And then he made it worse. He got defensive, told her that maybe if she could drive herself, this wouldn't be such a big deal, that she didn't have to rely on him. Rachel didn't respond. She just stared at the window, hands clasped in her lap. Later that evening, David sat on the edge of their bed, the guilt slowly bleeding in. He knew the truth. She didn't drive because she was scared. Because every time she sat behind the wheel, she worried her heart would skip and she'd veer off the road. He knew it because he'd seen it happen, seen her stumble, grip the sink, whisper prayers under her breath as she waited for the pounding in her chest to stop. But instead of owning up to his failure, he'd tried to place some of the blame on her, as if her illness were an inconvenience instead of something terrifying she lived with every day. Online, people weighed in. One person wrote, "She trusted you. She planned everything around you, and you let her down. That's not a scheduling error. That's betrayal." Another added, "If she had known you weren't coming, she could have called a friend, a cab, anyone. But you kept her waiting while the clock ran out. That's not just thoughtless, it's cruel." Others pointed out that David had effectively made her rely on him, then punished her for doing so. "You can't tell someone they don't need you after you've removed every other option," one comment said. "That's not fairness, that's control." And still another cut deeper. "You knew she had a medical condition. You watched the clock. You chose work. What would you have done if she collapsed at home waiting for you?" David read each one in silence, the words a bitter mirror. He hadn't meant to hurt her, but sometimes the damage isn't in what we intend, it's in what we allow to happen while we look the other way. That night, Rachel didn't come to bed. She lay on the living room couch, blanket pulled up, turned toward the wall. And David sat in their bedroom, staring at the ceiling, realizing that some apologies couldn't fix the feeling of being left alone when you needed someone most. Rachel had always tried to keep the peace in her family, especially when it came to her younger brother, Eric. Growing up in a small town outside Asheville, they were close in the way siblings often are, sharing secrets, covering for each other, fighting and forgiving in the same breath. But that bond began to erode the day Eric introduced his new girlfriend, Lila. Rachel, 34, immediately recognized her. Lila had been the girl who made her teenage years unbearable, the one who mocked her weight in the school cafeteria, who tore up a poem she submitted to the student lit magazine and laughed about it for weeks, the girl who never once apologized. Rachel didn't want to start drama. She hoped people could change. When Eric told her, "That's who I love and you'll just have to accept it," she tried. She really did. For a while, she smiled through the discomfort. She even invited Lila over for dinner, sat across from her while pretending her stomach wasn't churning the whole time. But when Rachel got engaged to David, the peace shattered. Lila suddenly insisted on being her maid of honor. "It just makes sense. I'm family now," she said. Rachel said no. Lila didn't take it well. She criticized everything. Rachel's dress choice, the flower arrangements, the color palette. She said the food was boring, and Rachel really should consider hiding her arms in the wedding gown. She even tried to ban Rachel's best friend from the bridal party. That was the final straw. Rachel told her, "You don't get to bully me into giving you something just because you're marrying my brother. That might have worked when we were kids, but not anymore." Eric took Lila's side. He called Rachel dramatic, accused her of clinging to the past. He said, "People change. You're being a jerk for holding on to old grudges." They didn't come to the wedding. Rachel wasn't invited to theirs. And just like that, their bond was severed. Years passed. Neither met the other's children. Their parents were heartbroken, especially during the holidays. They begged the siblings to reconcile, but the distance only grew deeper, especially when Lila continued to make snide comments through mutual family. Then, the pandemic hit. Eric's job disappeared. Lila's hours were cut. They struggled to keep the lights on. Eventually, Eric started a GoFundMe. When that didn't bring in enough, he went to his parents. They helped as much as they could. Then, one day, Rachel got a message from Eric. He said he wanted to make amends, said he missed her, wanted to reconnect. Rachel's heart softened. She wondered if maybe he was sincere, if maybe time had finally taught them both something. But the very next day, he asked for money. He also asked if she could watch his daughter so Lila could pick up some extra shifts. He said they were drowning, that family is supposed to show up when things fall apart. Rachel told him, no. She told him that whatever bridge remained between them burned the day Lila tried to hijack her wedding, and Eric called her a jerk for standing up for herself. Your problems aren't my problems anymore, and you only reached out because you needed something, not because you missed me. Eric didn't take it well. He accused her of being selfish. He said if the roles were reversed, he would have helped her. But Rachel knew that wasn't true. He'd already shown her exactly what she meant to him when it didn't benefit him. Now some of their extended family is calling her cold-hearted, saying she should help him, that blood is thicker than water, that grudges shouldn't get in the way of compassion. Rachel doesn't know what to feel. Part of her aches. She still loves her brother, at least the version of him that she remembers. But she also knows what it's like to be the only one expected to bend, the only one who's asked to forget, to forgive, while the same hurt plays out again and again. Some people online said what she needed to hear. Apologies come before amends, not after a request for cash. And others added, if his wife had truly changed, she wouldn't keep treating you like an enemy. You're not wrong for protecting your peace. And one comment stuck with her more than the rest. It's always convenient to call someone family when you need something. But where were they when you needed kindness, support, respect? Rachel sat by her front window that night, her son asleep down the hall. She didn't respond to Eric's last message. She didn't explain herself to anyone. She just let the quiet settle, and with it, a painful truth. Sometimes letting go of family is the only way to stop hurting. Planning a wedding was never something Rachel had dreamed about in detail. She wasn't the type to scrapbook dresses or obsess over centerpieces. But when David proposed, she felt something she hadn't in years, a quiet kind of hope. A belief that maybe, after everything, this could be her fresh start. But not everyone shared that joy. David's 4 sisters had always been polite to Rachel when they were just dating, friendly even. But everything shifted the moment the engagement became public. The congratulations were cold, the messages rare. Rachel felt the change like a slow leak in the room, subtle at first, then suffocating. At first, she's suggesting including them as bridesmaids. We should ask them, she told David, trying to keep things peaceful. But David said no. They don't support us. They never have. They don't deserve anything more than a seat and a generic invitation. Rachel didn't argue. What followed was months of passive-aggressive cruelty, snide comments disguised as jokes. One sister remarked, "Make sure you check out plus-size dress shops early, just in case." Rachel was a size 12. Another said, "I'm not staying overnight. It's not worth the trip." One more chimed in, "Roses? Aren't you worried people will think it's a funeral instead of a wedding?" Rachel tried to let it roll off her back, but every word was another pin in her heart. She knew they were furious they hadn't been made bridesmaids, and she suspected they believed Rachel had intentionally excluded them. Maybe she had, but only because she wanted peace on her wedding day. Then came the pandemic. Like many couples, Rachel and David had to cancel their 2021 wedding. It hurt, but they made new plans, simpler, more personal. They rented a quiet 9-bedroom house with a garden just outside Asheville. A small ceremony, 30 close friends and family. A little party in the backyard afterward with soft music and string lights. It wasn't extravagant, but it felt safe, intimate, healing. They assigned rooms to their parents and bridal party. Everyone else would stay at a nearby inn just 4 minutes down the road. It was clean, affordable, and, honestly, nicer than some of the rooms in the rental house. But when they shared the room list with David's mother, she asked immediately, "Where are the girls staying?" Rachel explained gently that his sisters could stay at the inn. 3 hours later, David's oldest sister was sobbing on the phone to him, claiming Rachel had, once again, excluded them, said they were tired of being treated like outsiders, that Rachel was tearing the family apart. David defended Rachel, calmly, firmly. But the moment his sister heard Rachel's voice in the background, she demanded to speak to her. David refused. "If you have an issue," he said, "take it up with me. I'm your brother." But Rachel had reached her breaking point. She took the phone, hands trembling, and tried to listen. The sister launched into a tirade, accusations, insults, old wounds twisted into weapons. Rachel didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply said, "If I cared about your opinion on my wedding, don't you think I would have asked you to be a bridesmaid?" Then she handed the phone back to David and walked away. He hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. Word spread quickly. David's entire family was furious. Even Rachel's own maid of honor and her parents said she had gone too far, that she should have known how sensitive this was, that now the sisters might show up at the wedding feeling humiliated and everyone would be walking on eggshells. They said she'd ruined the day before it even happened. Rachel didn't know what to say. She'd been biting her tongue for 2 years. She'd taken the snubs, the comments, the whispers, and all she'd wanted was to marry the man who loved her, without asking for permission from people who never saw her as enough. Online, strangers had kinder words. One person wrote, "They froze you out the moment you got engaged. What did they expect? You're not obligated to hand them the spotlight just because you married their brother." Another added, "They've disrespected you for years. You don't owe them a place at your table, much less your wedding party." Someone else simply said, if they didn't want to be treated like guests, they should have acted like family. Rachel sat with those words, holding them like stitches over an open wound. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but she also didn't want to keep shrinking herself just to make others feel comfortable. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Sometimes the deepest cuts don't come from enemies, but from those who claim to love us, family, partners, people we thought would always stand by our side. Rachel, 34, tried to build something beautiful with David, 44, but along the way she was met with silence, judgment, and betrayal from those who should have offered love. Her strength wasn't in how loudly she fought, but in how firmly she chose peace over pleasing others. And maybe that's what healing really looks like, walking away, even with tears in your eyes. Rachel's story is heartbreakingly not rare. Many people find themselves caught between the weight of familial obligation and their right to emotional safety. If you're facing toxic behavior from family or in-laws, remember, boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival. Emotional manipulation often hides behind traditions, guilt, or expectations, but you don't have to sacrifice your well-being to keep the peace. Start by identifying recurring patterns of control or emotional harm. Document instances that feel wrong, even if others minimize them. Seek therapy if possible. It's not a sign of weakness, but a lifeline. Don't hesitate to cut off or limit contact with people who consistently disrespect you, even if they're family. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to build a future free from past wounds. Healing doesn't mean returning to what hurt you. It means growing beyond it.